My parents ignored me during my illness while praising my sister, so I left. Now they beg for contact, but I'll never look back. I'm a 26-year-old guy, and I've always known I wasn't the favorite. Even saying that out loud makes my stomach tighten because it sounds petty, but it's the truth I grew up with. My younger sister, Emily, has always been the golden child. She's charming, pretty, and knows how to work a room. Teachers, neighbors, even strangers at the grocery store would call her a ray of sunshine. Meanwhile, I was the quiet one who got good grades, kept to myself, and learned early not to expect much noise or applause. I remember sitting at the kitchen table with my report card trembling in my hands, heart pounding with hope. "Mom, Dad, I got straight A's this semester," I said once. My mom barely glanced up from her phone. "That's good, honey," she murmured, before turning to Emily and gushing over the C+ she'd brought up to a B. My dad chuckled, "That's my girl," while patting her head. The sting of that moment still lives somewhere behind my ribs. Even birthdays became lessons in invisibility. Emily got balloons, a cake shaped like a princess castle, and a living room full of squealing friends. My parties were family only, usually just me, a lopsided cake from the discount bakery, and my parents scrolling through Facebook. The smell of frosting and melted candle wax used to make me nauseous because it tasted like disappointment. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was stronger for it, quieter, more self-sufficient. But there's a difference between self-sufficiency and neglect, and I didn't see that until much later. Looking back now, I can see how those years built a kind of numbness in me, like an armor, but that armor was about to crack. Because nothing prepared me for how deep their favoritism ran. Not until the day I got sick. It started as a low fever. Nothing major, just one of those annoying flus you think will pass in a couple days. I had just started my second semester of university, juggling classes and a part-time job. I remember waking up in my dorm, drenched in sweat, head pounding like a drum beat. I called my mom, voice shaking, hoping maybe this time she'd sound worried. "Take some Panadol and drink water," she said, distracted like always. I could hear the background noise, probably some TV show she liked more than my voice. "You're young, your body will fight it off." That was it. No follow-up. No call me if it gets worse, just click. I tried to tough it out for 2 days. My roommate offered to take me to urgent care, but I brushed him off. I didn't want to make a fuss. That's how I was raised. Don't complain, don't be a burden. By the third night, I couldn't stand up without blacking out. The last thing I remember before collapsing was the taste of bile in my throat and the cold floor pressing against my cheek. When I woke up, there was a tube in my arm and the sterile humming sound of machines around me. A nurse said, "You gave us a scare. You're lucky your friend brought you in when he did." I had a rare autoimmune issue, something dormant that had flared up suddenly. My immune system was attacking my own body. The doctor said if I'd waited one more day, I could have slipped into a coma. I called my parents from the hospital bed. My mom answered, irritated. "We're at the mall. Can you make it quick?" I told her where I was. Her silence lasted 3 seconds. Then, "Okay, but do you really need us to come?" That was the moment I knew. I could die and they'd still choose brunch over me. Lying in that hospital bed felt like being buried alive under white sheets. The walls were the color of paper, and the beeping of the IV monitor became my only company. Every time the door opened, my heart jumped, thinking maybe this was it. Maybe my parents had finally decided to show up. But it was always just a nurse, adjusting the drip or checking vitals. Meanwhile, my phone buzzed on the tray beside me. Emily's Instagram stories lit up my screen, her laughing at brunch with my parents, shopping for new shoes, selfies captioned, "Best family ever." Each post was like a blade sliding under my skin. I scrolled back to my own text messages. 3 unread blue ticks from my mom, 2 from my dad. No calls, no "how are you?" Not even an emoji. The one time my mom picked up, she said, "We're just swamped, honey, and you know your father can't be around germs." Emily's voice chimed in the background, giggling about a new dress. "We'll send you something later," Mom added quickly before hanging up. No flowers arrived. No card, nothing. I tried to joke about it with my roommate when he visited. "Guess I'm the family's forgotten experiment," I said with a half smile. He frowned and set a cup of soup on my bedside table. "Man, that's not right," he muttered. His sympathy felt heavier than my parents' indifference. That night, when the nurse turned off the overhead light, I stared at the ceiling and felt my chest tighten, not from the illness, but from a kind of grief I couldn't name. It wasn't just loneliness. It was realizing you could disappear and the people who raised you wouldn't even notice, and I had no idea that things were about to get even worse. My 22nd birthday came and went in a blur of IV drips and antiseptic smells. I had tried not to think about it, telling myself it was just another day, but deep down I wanted at least a text. Maybe a call. Something. Anything. The fluorescent light flickered overhead like it was mocking me. By noon, the nurses brought a small cup of ice cream and a single candle. "Happy birthday, buddy," one said with a sympathetic smile. It was sweet, but it wasn't Mom or Dad, not Emily. The weight of being invisible crushed me more than the illness ever could. I lay back in bed staring at the ceiling, trying not to cry while my phone remained stubbornly silent. Later that week, I scrolled through social media and saw my sister's birthday gift haul from my parents, a weekend trip to Miami, spa treatments, and matching outfits. They'd posted pictures with captions like, "Celebrating our princess." Each photo stabbed at my chest. My stomach churned, the bitter taste of jealousy and despair mixing with the lingering nausea from the IV. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter. "You're better than this," I muttered under my breath, my voice hoarse. But the ache didn't go away. It was in every quiet moment, every sound of laughter I wasn't part of, every passing day my parents acted like I didn't exist. That night, I lay in the sterile hospital bed, staring at the moonlight slicing through the blinds. For the first time, I thought about leaving. Not just the hospital. Leaving them. Everyone who had made me feel like I was nothing. The thought was terrifying, but also strangely liberating. I didn't know it yet, but that seed of escape was about to grow. When I was finally discharged, I had this naive hope that maybe things would change. Maybe they'd see me differently after seeing me so fragile, so human. I went home with my backpack and a bag of prescriptions, trying to summon the courage to speak up. Dinner was already on the table, Emily chattering about her latest selfies, Mom scrolling on her phone, Dad barely looking up from the news. I took a deep breath. "Can we talk?" I said, my voice quieter than I wanted. They glanced at me, eyebrows raised. "About what?" Mom asked, feigning patience, tapping her nails on the table. I told them everything, how lonely I felt, how scared I was, how hurt it was to see Emily get everything while I got silence. My words hung in the air for a moment. Then they laughed. Not a chuckle, but a full, dismissive laugh that cut through my chest. Emily smirked. "Wow, you're dramatic," she said, sipping her soda. Dad shook his head. "We can't cater to your emotions 24/7, you know. Life isn't a hospital." Mom's gaze flicked to her phone again. I felt the warmth in my chest drain, leaving an icy pit of disbelief. I wanted to scream, to make them feel even a fraction of the pain they'd caused me. Instead, I sat there, silent, my fork trembling in my hand. The plate of food tasted like ash. That night, lying in my old bedroom, I stared at the ceiling and realized something terrifying. They didn't just ignore me. They resented me for needing attention, for daring to exist as my own person. And the thought of staying, of letting that cycle continue, made my stomach turn. Somewhere deep inside, a spark ignited. A quiet, burning thought. If they won't see me, maybe it's time I stop being seen by them. The idea was terrifying, but it felt like the first step toward freedom. A week later, we had a family dinner at my aunt's house. The kind where everyone squeezes around a long table under a chandelier, gossiping over 2 salty casseroles. I debated even going, but some foolish part of me hoped that outside our house they'd act differently. I sat at the edge of the table picking at my food, the smell of roasted chicken mixing with perfume and wine. Halfway through, my uncle asked, "Hey, how are you feeling? Heard you were in the hospital?" Before I could answer, my mom waved her hand and laughed. "Oh, you know him, always overreacting. Just a little drama phase." The room chuckled. Emily put on a mock weak voice and pretended to faint, mimicking me calling from the ER. Everyone laughed harder. I sat frozen, the blood rushing to my ears. My fork scraped the plate so hard it squealed. "It wasn't a drama phase," I said quietly, but no one heard. Or maybe they just didn't care. Even my aunt, who looked uncomfortable, stayed silent. The humiliation crawled under my skin like fire ants. The rest of the dinner was a blur. Laughter, clinking glasses, my mom telling stories where I was the punchline. I forced bites of food down just to keep from crying. Every taste felt like ash and salt. That night, back in my room, the humiliation hardened into something else. Anger. Resolve. I stared at the glow of my phone, opening job boards, apartment listings in other cities. My fingers hovered over the screen, my heart pounding. I realized I didn't want to be their scapegoat anymore. I didn't want to be the joke at family dinners, the invisible son in hospital beds. Something inside me whispered, "It's time to go," and for the first time in my life, that thought didn't feel impossible. It felt inevitable. Over the next few weeks, I started planning quietly. Every paycheck I tucked a little aside, watching it grow like a secret promise. I searched for apartments in another city, small places with white walls and sunlight streaming through cheap blinds. I didn't tell anyone, not my roommate, not my friends, definitely not my family. It had to be my escape, my fresh start, untouched by their judgment. I researched remote jobs, contracts I could start immediately. I found one with decent pay, enough to cover rent and groceries while I healed, physically and mentally. I practiced what I would say if anyone asked where I'd gone: nothing. Silence was going to be my answer, my shield. Packing was the hardest part. Seeing my old clothes, my childhood books, my tiny trophies I'd won and never displayed. It felt like picking up pieces of a life that hadn't mattered to anyone else. The smell of my old room, the faint perfume of Mom lingering in the carpet, it all became heavy in my chest. I folded each item carefully, tucking memories into boxes labeled "mine" for the first time in my life. The night before I left, I wrote a single sticky note and placed it on the fridge. "Thanks for the memories. Don't contact me, no anger, no explanations, just truth." When I stepped out that morning with my duffel bag over my shoulder, the city felt like a blank canvas. For the first time in 26 years, I wasn't waiting to be seen, acknowledged, or pitied. I was finally invisible to them, but only in the way I wanted to be. And as I walked to the train station, a strange mix of fear and relief washed over me. I didn't know it yet, but leaving wasn't just physical. It was the beginning of reclaiming myself. The new city was small and quiet, nothing like the chaos I'd left behind. The streets smelled faintly of rain and exhaust, the kind of smell that made you feel alive and real. For the first time in my life, I woke up without the weight of being ignored pressing on my chest. No one's laughter pierced me like a reminder that I didn't belong. I found a tiny apartment with sunlight spilling through the window in the mornings. I unpacked my boxes, and for the first time, each item felt like it belonged, not just to the space, but to me. I bought a few groceries, cooked my own meals, and realized the smell of something I made wasn't tainted by anyone else's judgment. I had my routines, my own little victories, and no one to diminish them. Friends came into my life like slow rivers, bringing warmth I hadn't known I'd been missing. My therapist helped me untangle the anger and guilt that had been buried under years of neglect. And little by little, I felt my chest expand in ways it never had before, as if air itself was healing the hollow space inside me. Some nights, I still thought about my parents and Emily, but the longing had softened, replaced by a quiet strength. Freedom didn't feel like just being away. It felt like breathing after drowning. I knew deep down that leaving wasn't just an escape. It was a reclamation. But I also didn't realize that the hardest test, the one that would challenge every ounce of my resolve, was still waiting just over the horizon. 6 months later, my old illness flared up again. At first I panicked, the memories of the hospital bed and my parents' indifference flooding back. But then I realized something. I wasn't alone anymore. I had myself. I had routines, friends, and systems in place. I didn't need their validation to survive. When my symptoms worsened, I drove myself to urgent care. I navigated the waiting rooms, the antiseptic smell, the ticking of clocks, and I didn't cry for anyone but myself. A friend came later with soup and stayed overnight, making sure I wasn't alone. His kindness hit me harder than any family I'd ever had. I lay in bed that night, feeling the hum of the heater, the distant sirens outside, the soft breathing of my dog at my side. And for the first time, I felt safe. Not because someone had to care about me, but because I did. Even when the phone buzzed with messages from my parents asking how I was, I didn't respond. The texts burned a little, but I let them sit there unread. I realized they hadn't been missing me all along. They had only missed the convenience of having me under their control. That night, staring at the ceiling, I felt something I hadn't in years: empowerment. I had survived my illness, survived my family, and come out stronger. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them, and soon one would arrive that would test just how far I was willing to go to protect my peace. Out of the blue, my mom called. My heart skipped a beat, a mix of dread and curiosity twisting in my chest. "Your sister's wedding is coming up," she said, voice oddly clipped. "We need you to be there for the family photos." There was no apology, no concern, no acknowledgement of the years they ignored me, just a demand, like I existed only to fill a seat in a photo. I stared at my phone, numb. "I won't be attending," I said finally, my voice steady even though my hands shook. "Please don't contact me again." She screamed into the line, calling me ungrateful, selfish, dramatic. I could hear Emily laughing in the background, mocking me even from miles away. I hung up and sank onto the couch, the apartment suddenly too quiet. It hit me. This wasn't about missing me. They didn't care that I had been sick, alone, or ignored. They only wanted me for convenience, for appearances, to uphold the perfect image of the happy family at her wedding. I thought back to every birthday ignored, every achievement uncelebrated, every dinner where I'd been mocked. All those moments came rushing in, sharp and piercing, and for the first time the reality was crystal clear. I hadn't just left because I could. I had left because I had no choice. A shiver ran down my spine as I realized this was the moment the game changed. They weren't going to get me back so easily. And yet, a small, dark part of me wondered what lengths they might go to try. It didn't take long for the guilt campaign to start. My phone lit up with messages from aunts, uncles, even cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. "Why are you doing this to your mother?" one aunt wrote. "Your mom is crying every night, you know," another said. "It's your sister's special day, just suck it up and show up." Each message felt like a stone tossed into the pit of my stomach. They didn't know the truth. They only heard the story my parents wanted them to hear, that I was the problem, the ungrateful child who walked away for no reason. Emily posted a picture of her wedding invitation with the caption, "Wish my whole family could be there." But some people choose to be selfish. The likes and sympathy rolled in. I wanted to scream, to fight back, to tell everyone what really happened. The anger built up inside me until it felt like fire beneath my ribs. So late one night, I sat at my desk and wrote everything down. Every ignored birthday, every moment of neglect, every cruel joke and silent dismissal. My hands shook as I typed, but with every word, I felt lighter. I sent the letter to the whole family. Unfiltered, raw, no sugarcoating. For the first time, I told my side word for word. No more letting them control the narrative. After hitting send, I sat back and waited. No one replied, not at first, but I imagined the silence at those family group chats, the sudden shift when the golden child story started to crack. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt empty. And I knew that cutting ties was going to hurt even more before it started to heal. After I sent the letter, something inside me finally broke free. It was like the air changed, sharper, cleaner, but colder too. I blocked every number, every email, every social account connected to my parents and sister. I deleted old family photos from my phone, took down the few left on my walls. My emergency contact at work was changed to a friend. It was like erasing fingerprints from glass, painful, but necessary. At first, the silence felt suffocating. I'd been so used to the chaos even when it hurt. I walked through my apartment, the ticking of the clock and hum of the fridge suddenly thunderous. I caught myself glancing at my phone, expecting it to light up with another guilt trip. But there was nothing. Just peace. Or maybe it was grief. The hardest part was letting go of hope. Hope that maybe one day they would wake up and realize what they'd done. Hope that they'd reach out, not to accuse or demand, but to apologize. But that hope faded with every day of silence, replaced by a gentler kind of emptiness. I started sleeping better. I cooked meals that tasted like freedom, not obligation. Sometimes I'd see families at the grocery store, laughing together, and a dull ache would flare in my chest. But then I'd remember. I had survived without them. I'd built something on my own, something honest even if it was small. Cutting them off wasn't about anger anymore. It was about survival. About choosing myself. Maybe for the first time ever, I thought I was finally free. But pain has a way of circling back when you least expect it. One night, a voicemail slipped through from an unknown number. The voice was unmistakable. Emily. She sounded sharper than usual, her words icy, rehearsed. "I hope you know Mom's in the hospital now because of you," she said, her tone flat. "She thinks you hate her. She hasn't slept in days. Dad says you've broken this family. I hope you're happy." The words crashed over me like freezing water. I replayed the message again and again, her voice growing more poisonous with every loop. I could picture Mom in a hospital bed, Dad shaking his head, blaming me for everything. Guilt pooled in my stomach, thick and nauseating. Was I really the villain here? Was all this pain just my fault? I stared at the dark ceiling, gripping my phone until my knuckles ached. For a moment, I thought about calling them, about apologizing, begging to be let back in, even if it meant swallowing every last piece of my pride. Tears stung my eyes, the room suddenly feeling too small, too cold. I tried to eat that night, but the food tasted like cardboard. My hands trembled as I washed dishes, every small task reminding me of what I'd lost. That night, I barely slept. My mind spun with what-ifs. What if Mom really was sick because of me? What if I'd overreacted, let my anger turn me into the selfish person they always accused me of being? I wanted someone to tell me I wasn't wrong, that it was okay to put myself first. But all I had was the echo of Emily's voice, replaying my worst fears over and over. For the first time since leaving, I doubted everything. I felt completely alone, and I wasn't sure I'd ever feel whole again. I don't know what drew me to it, maybe desperation, maybe instinct, but that morning, I found myself digging through an old box in my closet. Buried under college notebooks and receipts was my old journal, the one I'd kept during my hospital stay. The pages were dog-eared, stained with coffee rings and old tears. My handwriting looked smaller, almost fragile, like the person I used to be. I sat on the floor and started reading. Entry after entry, I found raw, broken versions of myself begging for kindness, for just a moment of my parents' attention. I wrote about waiting by the hospital window for someone who never came, about listening to other families laugh in the halls while I sat alone, the sound of their voices muffled by walls that felt a mile thick. I wrote about calling my mom, voice weak, and hearing her tell me she was busy getting her nails done. I wrote about crying into my pillow on my birthday, about the ache in my chest when no one showed up. As I turned each page, the truth hit me with growing clarity. I didn't leave out of hate. I left out of survival. Every entry was a small act of hope that died a little more every day, until finally, I had nothing left to lose. The guilt Emily tried to plant in me started to shrivel and fall away, replaced by something sharper, resolve. I wasn't the villain. I was the survivor, and I owed it to myself not to go back. I wiped my eyes, closed the journal, and felt lighter. But there was still one chapter left in my story, one I never expected to write. 2 years later, I was standing in line at a local bookstore, flipping through the pages of a novel when I heard familiar voices, laughter, bright and unmistakable. I turned and saw them, my parents, Emily, dressed up and surrounded by shopping bags. They were exactly as I remembered. Mom's perfume trailing through the air, Dad checking his watch, Emily taking a selfie with her phone tilted just right. I froze. My heart thudded in my chest. For a second, I was 13 again, desperate for them to notice me, to say my name, to pull me into the fold. But they didn't see me. Not even a flicker of recognition as they passed, lost in their own world. I watched them from a distance, safe behind a rack of paperbacks. I felt the old ache sharp and sudden. But then, it faded. In its place was something softer. Relief. Freedom. I didn't need their attention, their approval, or their permission to exist. They moved on, laughing, out into the bright sunlit street. I could have followed. I could have called out, but I didn't. I turned back to the book in my hands, fingers trembling, but this time from something like joy. Leaving them hadn't been a tragedy. It had been my rebirth. I was invisible to them now, but not to myself. I felt strong, grounded, real. I left the bookstore with a new novel under my arm. A smile I didn't have to fake, and a sense of closure that didn't depend on anyone else. But as I stepped into the cool air, I knew one thing for sure. I was never going back. Not for them. Not for anyone. Now, at 26, I live in a small apartment that smells like coffee in the morning and rain at night. My days are quiet, steady, filled with things that are mine and mine alone. I adopted a dog from the shelter. His name is Lucky. Some nights, he curls up next to me on the couch, and I think about how I used to beg for scraps of love. Now it just finds me quietly when I least expect it. My health is better. My therapist says healing isn't linear, but these days I believe him. I've built a circle of friends who see me, really see me. There's no pretending, no striving to earn basic decency. I still get messages from distant relatives, vague, guilt-laced, asking why I don't call. Sometimes I reread them, but I never reply. That chapter is closed. Every once in a while, I remember my parents and Emily. I wish them well, truly. I hope they find whatever it is they're searching for in brunches and spa days and staged family photos, but I don't owe them my peace. I don't owe anyone the parts of me I had to fight to reclaim. I thought closure would come from them saying sorry, but it never did. Closure came the day I stopped waiting for it, the day I started living for myself. If you're reading this and you feel invisible in your own family, know this. You deserve more than crumbs. You deserve to be seen, loved, and chosen by yourself if by no one else. I'm not the afterthought anymore, and I never will be again.